Chapter 10. Sunshine at the hall, shadows at the cottage. Morning, noon, and night was Madeline inventing some new scheme of fun and frolic, never, however, neglecting her harp. Mademoiselle generally managed to get about half of her lessons. Aunt Matilda did not interfere, for Maddie had company and could not be expected to study much. "You know, Aunt, that it would be the height of impoliteness, and I could not expect the girls to take lessons. To be sure, Lucy does, as a matter of choice." This was sufficient, and Madeline's all-powerful arguments prevailed. Poor Mlle Fouladou was often sorely tried, and Fanfan was her only comfort. Occupied with her young friends, Madeline knew but little of the shadows gathering over her friends at the cottage. It was all sunshine at Woodcliff, for thus far Maddie's life had been all a bright summer day, but it would have been quickly dimmed if the young heiress had known the sorrows that were threatening her humble friends. Mr. Hamilton had formerly lived in the south, and having freed the servants who lived with him, he had brought his house domestics to his northern home. They were strongly attached to their master's family, and Madeline, especially, was their idol. Nanny thought nothing could surpass her young mistress in beauty, or grace, or smartness, and many a cup of flattery was administered by this faithful but foolish servant. "Girls, I think that we shall have some rare sport this fall. Jim, the coachman, is quite smitten with our Nanny. They shall have a wedding, and I'll be mistress of the ceremonies. You ought to see the darkies dance." And Madeline mimicked to the life what she had often seen in the kitchen. "Will they be married here?" inquired Lavinia. "Yes, indeed. They shall be married in our dining room, and I'll dress Nanny's head myself." Madeline watched her opportunity and questioned Nanny about the affair. "Law bless you, young missus, what put this air in your head? Jim is just a particular friend." "Yes, I know, Nanny. You need not try to deceive me," answered the child. "Well, Miss Maddie, what do you all think of Jim?" "He's a clever fellow, Nanny, and we are all willing." "Well then, miss, I mout as well tell. We are gwan to be married in about a month." "You shall have a nice wedding, Nanny. I'll give you your wedding suit. You shall be married in the dining room. Get your bridesmaids and groomsmen, and you shall have a grand time, Nanny." Maddie was a busy little bee during the next month. The evening at length arrived, and the guests assembled in the dining room waiting for the bride and groom. Maddie had been superintending the bride's dress, but having completed that, with her cousins, joined the company in the parlour. The minister stood waiting at the head of the room. At length the bridesmaids and groomsmen appeared, then Nanny and the groom. She was dressed in white, with low neck and short sleeves, and her head encircled by a wreath of large red roses. The ceremony proceeded. When about half through, Jim, supposing it ended, turned to kiss his bride. "Not yet," said the minister. "Oh well, so far so good. Go on, massa." When the ceremony was ended, they took their seats among the congratulations of their numerous coloured friends, and with the imitative quickness of their race, the manners of ladies and gentlemen were most amusingly copied in Mr. Hamilton's dining room. "Why, Miss Nanny, you're quite brilliant tonight," said one of the groomsmen. "Who are you calling Miss Nanny, Bill?" said the other groomsman, tittering. "That is Miss Roberts now." Nanny hung her head bashfully, and looking up at Jim said, "That name sounds mighty qua." About 10 o'clock, a nice supper was announced in the servants' sitting room, and it was really amusing to our young folks to see the airs with which the coloured gentlemen handed out the bells to the supper table. "We're much obliged to you, Miss Madeline," said Jim, "for this party, for we know that you got it up for us. I hope that you will make Nanny a good husband, Jim, for she is a good girl. I won't let you be cross to her." After supper, a number of songs enlivened the evening, and a serenade at a late hour, in which 4 voices joined, wound up the affair. Madeline had heard nothing of the Bruces for several weeks, excepting by a few casual words in the Sunday school room, for Lucy and she still attended. On the following Sunday morning, Maddie thought that Roland looked very sad, and Effie was not present. "What is the matter, Roland?" asked the child. "Oh, Madeline, dear mother is so sick. She seems to be growing weaker every day." "Don't get disheartened, Roland. You know what you have often said to me, look up for help. Yes, I know, Madeline, but the loss of my mother would be such a great calamity that I cannot always look up. Sometimes I cannot trust the promises. Then I get so weak I can scarcely hold up my head. I am sorry, Roland. Is there anything that I can do for her? Come and see her, Madeline. That would cheer her up. I have been detained by company, Roland. That is all the reason. Yes, I know that. We can't expect you to leave them often. I will come soon, Roland. I am so very sorry. Madeline kept her word, but her high spirits were suddenly saddened when she saw the pale face and trembling hands of her kind friend. Mrs. Bruce was sitting up, endeavouring to sew, but the marks of languor were so apparent that a chill settled around Maddie's heart, and she feared that Roland must soon lose this dear mother. "You are not well, Mrs. Bruce," said the child, as she took her friend's extended hand. "No, my dear, flesh and heart are failing, but God is the strength of my heart, and my portion for evermore. While he is left, I am perfectly at peace." Madeline looked upon the placid face and the sweet smile of trusting faith that lit the features of her friend, and thought how precious was that holy trust. "I know now, Mrs. Bruce, what you mean by looking up. How happy you must be. If I looked down upon myself, Maddie, with all my weakness and sin, or if I looked upon my dear children, who may soon be left motherless, my heart would sink. But when I look upward at the rest in store for those who love God, and at the sure promises to the children of the righteous, I can even rejoice in tribulation, because, my dear, they work patience, experience, and hope." Madeline glanced at Roland and Effie. The former was regarding his mother with a look of loving reverence, as though he partook of her lofty hope, but poor, delicate Effie sat with her head bowed upon her hands and the big tears rolling down her sweet face. Madeline drew the weeping child towards her and, passing her arm around her, whispered, "Don't cry so, Effie. Your mother may get better, and we will always be your friends." "I know that, Madeline, but where shall I ever find another mother?" Maddie returned with a saddened spirit, for with all her sanguine nature she could not but fear that deep sorrow was settling around the cottage household. Not a day passed without some little delicacy from Woodcliff, sometimes by Madeline's own hand, or else sent by a servant. Lucy frequently accompanied her cousin in her visits, but Lavinia never. She could not stoop to such a condescension. In all her letters to her father, Maddie never forgot her humble friends, and, in return, Mr. Hamilton directed that every comfort should be supplied to the declining mother. After a few weeks, Mrs. Bruce appeared to rally once more, and hope revived the spirits of all who loved her. Madeline especially was greatly elated, and was sure that her dear friend was recovering. With the revival of her hopes, her high spirits rose again. "Don't be alarmed, Roland. Your mother will soon recover." And Maddie yielded to the delusion with full confidence. Roland was now called to bear a heavy burden, for the support of the family fell chiefly upon him. Busy in their little garden, he toiled with a cheerful spirit, and found his donkey and cart a great treasure, for now he could go into market 3 times a week with the produce of his little plot of ground. It pained him sorely to leave school, but duty called, and the obedient spirit submitted. The delicacies from the hall kept his mother well supplied, and with the strong faith of a Gordon he could labour, wait, and even rejoice. The boy of 17, under the discipline of trial and the teaching of a holy mother, seemed to have reached the maturity of riper years, and Mrs. Bruce felt that she might lean upon him with affectionate trust as the instrument which God had chosen to cheer her declining days. Autumn was now rapidly closing around them, and Madeline, with her elastic step and bird-like voice, frequently crossed the door-sill of the cottage, always lighting it up with her bright, hopeful face, and leaving behind her the sweet echoes of her own joyous nature. Full of hope for her friends, her merry spirit kept the family all alive at the Hall. Her young friends were to stay until Christmas, and Madeline promised them great sport should there be snow enough for a sleigh ride. Tony Willikins, her warm admirer at school, often stepped in at Woodcliff to pay his respects, and having seen Mademoiselle at church and met her occasionally in her walks with Madeline, That prankish little girl had contrived to bring about quite an intimacy between the two. Many a bouquet that was sent for Madeline was conveyed to Mademoiselle with Tony's compliments, and Tony himself was often chagrined on seeing the French teacher innocently wearing the flowers intended for the roguish child. Tony had somehow learned a few French phrases, and, much to the amusement of our young friends, he made a barbarous use of his slim stock of language, not at all aware of his false pronunciation. His salutation of Maddie Morthel always set our young friend in a titter, and his persevering efforts taxed Mademoiselle's French politeness to the utmost. Poor Tony was a complete butt for Madeline and Lavinia, and many a joke did they play upon the unconscious youth. One afternoon, Tony paid them a visit in what he considered splendid costume. He had been told that small clothes were to be the fashion that winter, so, to be ahead of all others, had ordered a new suit of clothes, and presented himself at Woodcliff in black tights, with black silk stockings, pumps, silver knee and shoe buckles, and, to crown all, a pair of blue glasses, which he had been told was becoming. He wore also a fancy-coloured guard ribbon and a diamond pin. Tony thought himself irresistible, and when Madeline entered the parlour and saw the ludicrous figure, it was next to impossible to restrain her laughter. At that moment, fortunately, Fan performed some of her amusing pranks, which gave Maddie an opportunity of indulging her risible faculties, and if Tony had not been such a weak youth, he might have seen that the laugh continued much longer than Fan's oft-repeated tricks could call forth. "Myth, Madeline, I want to thou you my new guard ribbonth," and Tony opened a package which contained every imaginable colour. "Which do you think the 40th myth?" "I like blue. That is my favourite colour." Immediately Tony changed his scarlet guard for a blue one, and, much to the amusement of the young girls, he continued, "Blue is my colour now." "Won't you sing, Tony?" asked Madeline. "Yeth, if Maddie Morthel will play for me. What shall I sing, myth?" "How can I leave thee?" answered Madeline with a merry twinkle. "That is though affecting, myth. I am afraid that I can't get through it, but I'll try." Mademoiselle took her seat at the piano, and Tony commenced with a lisping, languishing tone to sing. Madeline was convulsed with laughter, and Tony, who saw her handkerchief covering her face, thought that she was deeply affected, and said, "We had better not fineth the thong, Maddie Morthel. It affects Miss Maddith nerve." Madeline could stand no more. Jumping up, she ran out of the room to indulge her burst of laughter, which could no longer be restrained. Lucy did not sympathize with the jokes played upon Tony, for his weakness was his misfortune, and with her correct principles she could no more ridicule that than she could a blind, deaf, or lame man, but Madeline had not yet learned to ask about the right or wrong of an action. The impulses of the moment yet ruled the child. Sometimes the thought would cross her mind that it might not be just right, but the love of fun prevailed over her light scruples. The cold increased, and one morning Madeline ran into Lavinia's room, saying, "Get up, Lavinia. Here is a grand snowstorm. Now for our promised ride." They watched the progress of the storm anxiously. All day and night it continued, and by the next morning the sleighs began to fly around the neighborhood. At that moment, a sleigh stopped, and Tony, dismounting, invited the young ladies to take a ride. "I will call about 4 o'clock, and we will ride up to the White House, take supper, and return by moonlight." Maddie ran to her aunt to obtain her consent, which was given on condition that she should make one of the party. Accordingly, at the appointed hour, furred, tippeted, and well protected from the cold, our party set off in high glee. "You can manage those spirited horses, I hope, Tony," said Aunt Matilda. "Don't be afraid, ma'am. I have driven them many a mile, and never had an accident yet." The ride was splendid, Madeline in wild spirits, and the whole party affected by her merry sallies. Arrived at the White House, Tony ordered a supper, and after a lively dance in one of the parlours, in which all joined but Lucy, they sat down to a nice supper, and then started for home. There was a number of sleighs on the road, all travelling at full speed. Tony's animals were not to be passed. A large sleigh came dashing by. Tony tried to check the wild animals, but all in vain. On they rushed. Miss Matilda was in an agony of terror. Utterly unable to manage them, they galloped on madly, till, bringing up on a snowbank, they upset the party on the roadside and raced furiously on until overtaken by several men, who came to the rescue and after some time succeeded in quieting the excited horses. Miss Matilda was in a state of dreadful alarm, Mademoiselle Fouladou deploring the condition of little Fan-Fan, who had accompanied the party, Madeline laughing at the adventure, Lavinia provoked, and Lucy quietly awaiting the return of Tony. When the youth at length appeared, Mademoiselle threw up her hands, exclaiming piteously, "Oh, Monsieur Willikins, take us home, ma pauvre Fanfan will take a dreadful cold." Tony wrapped the dog up in his foot muff and proceeded home as rapidly as they could go with safety. "We have had a jolly time, mademoiselle," exclaimed Madeline. "I think the upset was the best part. None of us were hurt, and it was only a good joke after all." Little did Maddie know of the sorrow that was wringing the young hearts at the cottage. Not having heard for several days, the next morning Madeline started to see her friends. On entering the house, no one was visible. All was quiet, and she proceeded upstairs to the widow's chamber. Propped up with pillows, with a face as pale as the white sheet, and labouring for breath, she beheld her humble friend. Effie was sitting on one side of the bed, close to her mother, and Roland was reading the Bible to his declining parent. "Let not your heart be troubled. Ye believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions." He stopped for one moment, but Madeline said, "Go on, Roland," and, with his own rich voice, he proceeded to repeat a psalm. "I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills from whence cometh my help. My help cometh even from the Lord, who hath made heaven and earth," responded the mother, with uplifted eyes and hands clasped over her panting breast. "Come here, Madeline, my dear child," said the fading Christian. "You see that it will not be long before I shall go home and be no more seen. But remember what I tell you, that God is a sufficient refuge in this hour of trial, and the Saviour of sinners my all in all." "Can you look up still, dear Mrs. Bruce?" asked Madeline with deep solemnity. "Yes, my dear child. I know that he that keepeth Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. He will not suffer the sun to smite thee by day, nor the moon by night. That is the promise, Maddie, and I believe it with all my heart. His rod and his staff, they comfort me." "You will get better yet, Mrs. Bruce, I am sure," answered the child, "for I know that Roland and Effie pray for you, and God has promised to answer prayer." "Yes, he will answer us, when we ask with submission to his will. His will now is made clear and plain. My days on earth are drawing swiftly to a close. I am ready and willing to depart and be with Jesus, which is far better than to stay here, but to leave my darlings, Maddie, is a sore trial. You will not forget them, dear, when I am gone." "Forget your children, never. I know none that I love so well, and so long as I live, they will find me, little Madeline, their true friend." "Bless you, my dear child, for those kind words. They cheer my heart. I look upon them as an answer to my prayer, for this morning there was an hour of darkness when I thought of them, especially of Effie, but now I can keep my eyes fixed upon heaven and bid adieu forever to earthly cares." Effie was weeping bitterly. Her mother turned her face towards her and said, "Do not distrust our Heavenly Father, my child. He will comfort and sustain you. He has sent this dear little friend to us in our hour of sorrow." Turning to Madeline, she continued, "Tell your father, Maddie, that we shall never forget his kindness. For weeks your family physician has been attending me, sent by your father. He has done all that he can, but vain is the help of man." Madeline was deeply impressed by the lesson of that solemn hour, for she had never been so near the presence of death before. From that hour she spared no pains to administer to the comfort of her precious friend. Betty, the old cook, was a kind-hearted woman, and daily prepared some little delicacy grateful to the invalid, which Madeline and Lucy took with their own hands. Deep was the sorrow settling down upon the heart of Roland Bruce, for his mother was parent, friend, guide, his only earthly stay. When he looked into the wilderness of life without his mother, it did indeed seem a desolate, dreary waste. He sat looking upon the pale face, regarding him with such a look of unutterable love. "Roland, come sit by me. I have much to say to you, while I have strength to speak." He arose and seated himself close by his mother's side. "You are 17 now, my son, with almost the character of a man, and blessed be God. I believe that you are his dear child." Roland took his mother's hand, and while tears rained over it, he replied, "To you, dear mother, under God, I owe all that I am. I can never forget the lessons of wisdom, truth, trust in God, and heroic endurance that you have taught me by examples from the Bible, from the world, and especially from our own honored race. You must never forget your lineage, Roland. You are not descended from those who derive their greatness from outward show, magnificent adornment, or the pomp and equipage of courts. Your ancestors were trained in the humble manse, in the lowly cottage, among the rude mountains of Scotland, and their grandeur was moral only. They were born in the days when to be a spiritual Christian was to hold life very cheap. The spirit of those days has always distinguished our race, for in every generation there has been a witness for God among the Gordons." "I have never forgotten it, mother," answered Roland. "I think it is that which makes me think so little of the pomp of this world. I have never felt at all impressed by what I have seen at Woodcliff, because I contrast it all with the humble tombstone in that Scottish glen, and with all else that you have told me of the name of Gordon. I believe, my son, that God destines you for something good and great. Roland, remember what I mean by great. Not rich or grand in earthly goods, or even in intellectual culture merely, but great in deeds of benefit to your race. In order to reach that point, spare no pains to obtain a good education." "How shall I, mother? It is what I long for, but I have no money, no means, no influence. I am all alone." "Where there is a will, there is a way, Roland. I do not wish you to have money or influential friends. I want you to have trust in God. This is the motto I leave with you, my son. Looking aloft, remember it is your dying mother's motto. When discouraged, turn to that, and I am sure that you will prosper." "Oh, mother, how shall I live without you? Your voice is like a trumpet to me. It stirs the very depths of my soul, and when you speak, it seems as if I could dare anything. I never shall forget my feelings when you bade me read the inscription on the tombstone of our martyred ancestors. My soul seemed to take a great leap and really to swell within my childish form. I felt as if I never could be low or mean or grovelling after that, and so I feel today. But what will it be when you are gone?" And Roland bowed his head and wept. She laid her hand upon his head and said, "When I am gone, Roland, these memories will be with you. I know. To keep your soul from blight. I have perfect confidence that God will keep his promise to me and to you. He will guide you, I am sure. And though you may have sore trials, he will sustain my Roland, and make him a blessing to the world. Too many twilight hours of consecration, too many seasons of dedication has my father witnessed, when Roland's name was itself a prayer. To allow one moment's doubt, not one of those sacred hours will ever be forgotten by our covenant-keeping God. Oh, what I am losing in you, my mother. It is God's will, my son. Perhaps by cutting you loose from all earthly dependence, he designs to cast you wholly upon himself. This is the way that you are to learn the blessedness of looking aloft. Think what others have done who have risen from the humblest walks of life, and do likewise. Only let all be done for the glory of God, not for your own exaltation, Roland. If it is ever in your power, I wish you to visit your home in Scotland. You have an aunt and cousin living there. There is some property also, and I think that it will be to your advantage to seek out your relations. There is an old friend of mine whom I should like you to see, Malcolm Graham. He would be a valuable friend. Above all things, get a good education, stop at no sacrifice, shrink from no labor." Roland listened to his mother's words as though it were a voice from heaven, and to him it was, for the message of that hour guided all his earthly destiny. He rose with reverence. His feelings were too deep for utterance. Pressing a kiss on either cheek and on the calm, pale forehead, He left the room and bowed by his bedside, poured out his young soul in fervent prayer. "What has been done, by the blessing of God, shall be done again," said Roland to himself. Looking aloft, trusting in God, I can do all things. The resolution of that silent hour was sublime. It was known to none but God, but doubtless a record was entered in the book of God's remembrance, which was never blotted out, never revoked, and the name of Roland Bruce was seen by angels signed to that recorded dedication and sealed by the precious blood of the Redeemer. From that day, the setting of life's sun to Mrs. Bruce was slow, sure, but glorious. "One more charge, Roland," said the mother, after an hour's converse. "Be faithful to Effie. I need scarcely tell you that, but she is a delicate flower, the package, and must be tenderly cherished, Roland. And after I am gone, in my top drawer, tied with a black ribbon, you will see a package. It is for you, Roland. I can trust you with your mother's history." Elsie Gibson had been absent for months from the neighbourhood, but one evening suddenly she appeared at the cottage. She seemed much agitated on hearing how ill Mrs. Bruce was, and asked to see her. Conducted to the dying chamber, and standing by the bedside, she took the pale, withered hand that lay upon the bedclothes, and said, "Mary Bruce, this is a solemn hour. I trust that you are at peace with God." "Blessed be my Saviour's name. I am. I have no fears for the future, no anxiety for the present. Death is swallowed up in victory. Is there any message that you would send to any of your Scotch friends, Mary? I may go to Scotland ere long. Is there anything upon your mind, Mary?" "There is no one near, Elsie, is there?" anxiously inquired the invalid. "There is no one, Mary. We are all alone. If you ever see my brother or any of my relations, give my love and tell them how happy were my dying moments. And now, Elsie, you knew my husband in former days. Do you know that sometimes I have felt that he was not dead? He was so singular. Sometimes I thought he was deranged. He became so gloomy in latter years that I have thought perhaps he is not dead. We never heard of it, certainly, and then the supplies which I received so long must have come from him." "If he were alive, would you send him any message?" "I should like to tell him that I freely forgive any unkindness which he showed to me. He had sore trials to rend his heart, and so had I, Elsie. If he is alive and has forsaken his family, I forgive him that too. Because if he is, I believe that it was done in an hour of great depression, perhaps insanity." Elsie listened earnestly to these words. A faint smile passed over her face as she replied, "I ken something o' your story, Mary. It was a sad one, very much like the song o' Auld Robin Grey. But your sorrows are amaist o'er, Mary, and on the other side I will be plain and clear." A few more days, and the ministering angel called for the faithful mother, and bore her peacefully, happily, over the swellings of Jordan to the bosom of the Redeemer whom she loved. Roland stood in the presence of the dead with solemn, tender dignity, for he felt that no common loss was his in parting with such a friend and counsellor in life's trials and sorrows. But his hopes of reunion were so strong, so bright, that time appeared but as a little span, at the end of which he should again meet the spirit of that sainted parent. Effie was not so strong, poor, timid, loving child. It seemed to her as if life would weep itself away in the first burst of anguish that filled the chamber of the dead. Aunt Matilda undertook the expenses of the widow's funeral, and the family at the Hall joined the humble procession. Elsie Gibson was a sincere mourner, and made many mysterious remarks which none could explain. About a week after the funeral, Roland and Effie bent their steps to the village graveyard. When they came in sight of the grave, what was their surprise to see Elsie and a man wrapped up in a heavy cloak in earnest conversation. He stood with his handkerchief to his face as though deeply affected, but as soon as Elsie perceived the approach of the two, she hurried away with her mysterious companion. They were both surprised, and wondered who it could be thus interested in their mother. They were paying their last visit ere disposing of the furniture at the cottage. Aunt Matilda had offered Effie a home where she was to make herself useful with her needle. Roland was preparing to obey his mother's request of seeking an education. All was ready for his departure, and Madeline sent for him to come up to the cemetery in the evening. When reaching his mother's grave, there sat Madeline on the humble mound, at the head of which was placed a simple headstone of white marble, with his mother's name and age inscribed, with the sweet words, "Asleep in Jesus." "Is this your work, Madeline?" asked the boy. "Yes, Roland. It was the last thing that I could do for you. You have been a faithful friend to me, and it is a small return." I cannot tell you, Madeline, how grateful I am for this act of kindness. It was a trial to me to think that my mother must lie in the grave without any sign to mark the place of her burial. When do you leave us, Roland? Just as soon as my little stock at the cottage is disposed of. It is of very little value, but after all our debts are paid, what is left is for Effie. I can take care of myself. I shall be all alone in the great world, Maddie, but it will be a comfort to know that you, my little friend, will not forget me. Madeline's eyes filled with tears. That cannot be, Roland. All that I know of anything that is good and holy began with you. When I first knew you, I scarcely knew the difference between right and wrong. There is one thing I want you to promise, Maddie, and that is to read your Bible morning and evening, praying for God to help you to understand what you read. That is a small request, Roland, and I promise that I will let nothing interfere with the duty. May our Father bless you, Maddie, and have you always in his holy keeping. I shall never cease to pray for you. Where are you going, Roland? To college, Maddie, where I hope to gain a classical education. My mother charged me to strive for that, and with my eyes fixed upon heaven, I hope to succeed. Have you any money, Roland? The boy smiled as he replied, In the bank of heaven, Maddie. What do you mean by that, Roland? I mean that there are promises made to God's children. Dear mother has always told me that God's word can never fail, so his bank can never break, Maddie. I shall miss you, Roland, when my naughty fits come. I shall want you to show me how to conquer myself. You must not lean on any human arm. There is one strong arm, Maddie, the one that conquered sin, Satan, and death. That is Jesus, Roland. I wish that my faith in him was just like yours. Pray, Maddie, that he would give you faith. He is the author and finisher of our faith. Do you remember any of the little songs that I have taught you, Maddie? Yes, Roland, I remember them all. I shall get the music and learn them perfectly now. Let us sing together our last song, Maddie. And Roland's rich voice, with Madeline's sweet, clear notes, joined in the dear old song, Should old acquaintance be forgot, and never brought to mind? Should old acquaintance be forgot, in days o' lang syne? For old lang syne, my Jo, for auld lang syne, we'll take a cup o' kindness yet, for old lang syne. Maddie's voice trembled, and ere they reached the last verse, she bowed her head and wept. Roland put his hand in his pocket and drew out the likeness which Madeline had brought from Boston for his mother. Here is the face of my kind little friend, said the boy. I shall often talk to it when far away. I have nothing but the seaweed and the shells to look at, Roland, but in my heart the memory of all the wise and precious things which you have taught me. It is time for me to go now, Maddie. Goodbye. I am sure that we shall meet again. Madeline looked up with such a bright smile through her tears and said, Remember, Roland, what I have always said, that you will come back to Woodcliff a great man, and I shall be so glad to see the upstarts around us bowing down to Roland Gordon Bruce, the son of poor widow Bruce. Goodbye, Roland. I shall never forget the lessons of Maple Lane School, or the happy days that we have spent together. Giving her hand to Roland, they exchanged a parting clasp, and Madeline turned to leave the cemetery. Roland sat down upon his mother's grave and watched the childish form until she was seen no more. Then, bowing his head upon his hands, he could no longer restrain the silent tears that would chase each other down his cheeks. Thus fade my earthly friends, sighed the boy. First my mother, then Madeline, this precious little friend, then Effie, my darling sister next, and I shall be alone, a waif upon the wide, wide world. But no, not a waif while God lives and my Saviour reigns, for blessed be his name, I can trust him still. The little stock at the cottage was soon disposed of, and after all their mother's debts were paid, nothing remained but a few dollars, which Effie insisted Roland should take with him in his first encounter with the world. Effie was comfortably settled at Woodcliff, Roland stayed at old Peter's cabin a day or two, and Lucy and Lavinia had returned to Boston. "A letter from Papa, dear aunt," exclaimed Maddie. "He is in New York, and will be here tonight." And she was nearly wild with delight. "Won't I surprise him with a morning serenade on my harp?" And she had it brought into the room adjoining her father's, that she might awake him in the morning with her music. There was no more composure for Madeline during the whole of that day, busy in her father's chamber and in the library to see that all was prepared for his comfort, adding, as the last touch, some sweet flowers for both rooms. Madeline tried to settle herself to some employment, but all in vain until she uncovered her harp. Practicing some of her best pieces, she spent the rest of the morning in preparing for her serenade. Evening at length arrived, and with it her dear father. Folded once more in his arms, Madeline was perfectly happy for the moments following his arrival. The evening was spent in showing the beautiful things that Mr. Hamilton had brought for Madeline and her aunt, nor was Effie forgotten by the kind man. "Something will arrive tomorrow, Maddie, that I could not bring with me on account of its bulk. I know that it will please you best of all." Handsome dresses, laces, gloves, and jewelry were lavished upon the idolized child. Mr. Hamilton was a happy man, once more seated in the midst of his family. Fatigued, he retired early to rest, and, rising early in the morning, stood at his window to enjoy the beauty of a magnificent sunrise. While quietly looking upon the scene, he thought that he heard the sound of very low, sweet music. For a moment it ceased, and he thought that he must have been mistaken, but again it swelled out in deep, rich chords of melody, accompanied by a charming voice. It seemed very near, certainly in the next room. Opening the door, what was his surprise to see Madeline, in her nightdress, seated at a harp, performing most delightfully and singing a song of welcome for her father. He listened in delighted silence until the close, then exclaimed, "Why, my daughter, what does all this mean? How in the world did you accomplish all this without my knowledge?" "It was commenced in Boston, Papa, and during your absence I have applied myself diligently, determined to surprise you." "Well, truly, I think that the fairies must have been very busy, Maddie, both with you and me." "Why with you, dear Papa? Have you been learning too without my knowledge?" "You will know today what I mean, dear, but really, you could have done nothing that could have pleased me better than this pleasant surprise." Mr. Hamilton seemed to be very frequently at the front door, watching evidently for an arrival. At length, Madeline's curiosity to know what was coming was about to be satisfied, for a wagon turned into the avenue, bringing a very large and singularly shaped packing box. It was brought into the house and soon opened when, to Madeline's surprise, an elegant French harp appeared. Throwing her arms around her father's neck, she exclaimed, "Thank you, dear, dear Papa. This is just what I wanted. How in the world did you know it?" "Did I not tell you, Maddie, that the fairies must have been very busy? But candidly, I have always intended that you should study my favorite instrument, and have brought you one of the finest that I could obtain in Paris. Is it not delightful that I have been taking lessons, Papa? Now I can send away the old harp and have my own." For some weeks, Madeline was busily occupied with her beautiful instrument, but Mr. Hamilton was obliged to yield at last to the conviction that he must part for a few years with his darling child if she was ever to be properly educated for the sphere in which she was destined to move, for, under the weak guidance of Aunt Matilda, that could never be. As soon as he could obtain the cooperation of good Aunt Clara, a suitable boarding school was solicited, and, after due preparation, Madeline was sent from home to remain until her education should be completed. It was a sore trial to both parent and child, and the parting nearly overcame the resolution of the father, who could scarcely endure the loneliness of Woodcliff without his darling. Poor Effie would also be very lonely, but Aunt Matilda was really kind at heart, and imposed nothing upon the young girl but what she was fully competent to perform. Chapter 11. A Mother's Life Sorrow. Madeline had been gone for some days, and Roland had nearly completed his arrangements. He saw much of Effie, for the few remaining hours were precious to both. "Effie, meet me this evening in the cemetery. I wish to read you our mother's manuscripts." Effie promised. The last evening had arrived, and the orphans met upon their mother's grave for the sad farewell. Roland untied the black ribbon and commenced reading. "When you read these lines, my dear children, my mortal remains will be sleeping in the quiet grave, but I myself shall be with Jesus, and that is enough of bliss for an immortal spirit. I have thought it wise to make you acquainted with the history of my early life. You know that my father was the minister of the parish where I was born. He was a wise and holy man, and gave me all the advantages of a good education. My mother died when I was young, but my Aunt Ellen, my father's sister, came to take charge of the manse, and to bring up the motherless children. She was an excellent woman, and faithfully performed the part of a mother. I had a cousin named Malcolm Graham, to whom I had been most tenderly attached from my earliest childhood. We had roamed our native mountains, and sailed upon our Scottish lakes together. We had walked from earliest days to the house of God in company, had sang from the same hymn book, and had joined the church on the same day. We sang the same Scottish songs, loved the same wild stories of our martyred ancestors. In fine, we were as one soul. No love was ever purer, holier, deeper than that which filled our young hearts for each other. My father and my aunt were blinded. They had been so accustomed to look upon us as brother and sister that nothing could have surprised my father more than when Malcolm came to ask that the current of our lives might henceforth flow in one calm, holy channel. "It canna be, Malcolm. You are our nearer kin. I couldna ask the master's blessing upon sic a union. Oh, Uncle Gordon, ye canna break your Mary's heart by sic an answer. Why did I na ken this before? I might ha' seen it, eh?" Malcolm pleaded his cause earnestly. My father loved us both tenderly. At the end of a week, he gave his unwilling consent, on the ground that, as he had blindly allowed the intimacy, he had not the heart to say nay, and we were betrothed. At the same time, Stephen Bruce, the son of my father's most intimate friend, renewed his addresses, for since I had grown to early womanhood, he had twice a year offered his hand and been refused. This was the man that my father favoured. He was a reserved and rather gloomy man, but his love for me was an all-absorbing passion. He had a good moral character, was well off in the world, and moreover was the son of my father's bosom friend. Malcolm was poor in the possessions of the world, but rich in all that could ennoble and dignify a man. There was but little prospect of his rising in the world, in an obscure part of Scotland. An opportunity offered for him to enter upon a lucrative situation in China. He accepted. My heart sank within me, for I felt that a wide ocean would soon separate us, and I feared that I should never see the face of Malcolm Graham again. My father encouraged the step. I could see the secret joy of Stephen Bruce, and I felt as if I could never consent. But Malcolm was young and hopeful. He saw at the end of his long exile a sweet, happy home among our native mountains, where we should share life's joys and sorrows, and at last I became reconciled to the thought. We parted at the sweet trysting place where we had so often met in the happy days of our young affection. On the banks of the lake, near our quiet home, stood a clump of old trees, whose branches dipped gracefully in the placid water. Thither we walked slowly to spend our last sad hours. I wore the light blue snood of a Scottish maiden, which somewhat confined my curls. "Shall I hae one, Mary?" asked my cousin. I cut one from my head and tied it with a piece of the blue ribbon of my snood. Malcolm placed it in a little pocket-book and laid it away in his bosom. After hours of silent weeping, he bade me farewell, and I felt as if a load of lead sank down into my heart as I watched his retreating form until he vanished from my sight. For 2 years letters came regularly, all bright, encouraging, hopeful. He was fast acquiring a fortune and would return in another year. In the meanwhile, Stephen Bruce increased his assiduities. I could not banish him from the house, because he was the son of my father's friend. In another year, a letter announced that Malcolm would sail in the ship Neptune for Liverpool, and that I might expect him in October, when I must be ready to fulfill my vow. I was a happy creature then. All the intervening time was passed in making my simple preparations. Aunt Ellen was a thrifty housekeeper, and took great pride in the quantity of bed and table linen which her niece must have. I was occupied chiefly with my wardrobe. My father did not seem much rejoiced, for he had never given up his Scotch prejudice against the marriage of first cousins, but he was a man of too much integrity to break a given promise. The summer passed. The falling leaves were musical to me, for they brought October. The month passed, but no news of the Neptune. November passed in the same manner. December began to drag its cold and dreary days along, but still no news. At length, one morning, my father entered the family parlour with a grave countenance and a newspaper in his hand. "Ellen, will you come into my study?" said my father to my aunt. My heart gave a sudden bound, for I had long been so anxious that even the fluttering of a leaf would affect me. I saw my father's face. It was ominous. Aunt Ellen returned, and sitting down by my side, she said tenderly, "Mary, can ye bear bad news?" "What is it, Aunt Ellen?" I replied, starting to my feet. "Tell me. Tell all. Anything is better than suspense." She laid her hand upon my young head and softly smoothed the rippling hair that lay upon my forehead and down my temples. "The Neptune has foundered at sea, Mary, and Malcolm Graham is among the missing." I heard no more. For hours I lay stunned and insensible, for weeks between life and death. At length, a good constitution, under the direction of a wise but inscrutable providence, triumphed, and I awoke to take up the duties of my daily life with a sad and chastened spirit. My father redoubled his kindness, but it was evident that Malcolm's removal was a relief. The only request I made was, do not allow Stephen Bruce to visit the manse. I could not bear it. My request was complied with. During all this time, I never wholly lost my hope. I would say to myself, among the missing, not the lost. Malcolm may yet be alive. 2 years of silent sorrow passed. The light of my life had gone out. I busied myself about my father's house, my brother's clothes, and in the duties belonging to me as the minister's daughter, but joy had passed away. I seldom saw Stephen Bruce, excepting at church, but I knew that my father visited him. Occasionally I met him by the roadside, but he never joined me. This delicacy of conduct gained my respect, and when my father at last requested, for his own sake, that the son of his old friend might visit him, I consented, for my father had been very kind to me. He came occasionally, was always polite and respectful to me, nothing more. At the close of the 3rd year, after Malcolm's loss, my father called me to him and said, "My daughter, I ha' tried to be considerate and kind to ye. I ha' placed nae compulsion upon your inclinations. Now I ha' an request to make. Will ye not allow Stephen to renew his addresses? He is just as devoted to you as ever. He has loved ye faithfully for 10 years, ever since your childish days. If his devotion and worth can overcome your repugnance, or rather indifference, I ha' nae mair to say, but it would please your father if you would allow him to renew his visits to you personally." "Give me a week to think of it, father. That is all I ask." At the end of that time, I agreed to my father's proposal. I felt that all my love was in the deep ocean buried with Malcolm Graham, and that duty must henceforth rule my life. To please my father only, I consented. Stephen was very considerate, but I saw that the same devotion filled his heart. He was so anxious to please, so humble, so undemonstrative, that I could not but pity him. I treated him with kindness, and sometimes even with tenderness. Then he was so grateful for the smallest act that it touched my woman's heart. At last, when in trembling tones he ventured once more to urge his suit, I did not discourage him. I simply told him to wait. "Bless ye, Mary, e'en for that," was the grateful answer. At the close of the 4th year, I consented to become his wife. He wept in the fullness of his joy, and my father was happy, but the name of Malcolm Graham could never be mentioned in his presence. If by chance it was, dark frowns would lower on his brow, and it was at all times a forbidden subject. He was a kind husband, and I tried to be a faithful wife, but in the twilight gloaming there were times when the memory of my cousin poured over my heart like a flood. The next year after our marriage, you were sent, Roland, to form a new tie between us. You were a lovely babe, and your mother was proud of the sweet infant that smiled upon her from his cradle. Stephen Bruce was a handsome man, Roland, and you were like him. The same profusion of dark hair, the same dark eyes, but there was always about you, Roland, an open frankness that never characterized your father. He was constitutionally reserved and taciturn, often gloomy. Our married life flowed smoothly along for 2 years. We lived at the manse, for my father could not part from his only daughter. He was very fond of little Roland, and the presence of a baby in the house was a sunbeam across his path. One very stormy winter evening, I was rocking my little boy to sleep, singing some sweet cradle song. The wind howled fearfully without, and the snow came down in heavy drifts. I heard a footstep on the little porch in front of the manse. It seemed to be a man knocking off the snow before entering. The family dog gave a familiar bark of joy, and a voice that I thought drowned in the deep ocean said, "Down, Shep, down, sir." My heart stood still. The next moment, the door opened, and Malcolm Graham stood before me. He extended his arms. "Mary! Mary!" he cried. "How you no welcome?" I started to my feet. I am sure that my eyes must have glared with terror. I sank upon the chair by the side of the cradle, and pressing my hand upon my heart, continued gazing. I was speechless with terror and grief. "What is in that cradle, Mary?" "It is my child, my babe, Malcolm." "Tell me its name, Mary Gordon." "Roland Gordon Bruce," I answered in trembling tones. He struck his head with both his hands in anguish. "Hay I come home for this? Oh, Mary, how could ye say forget me? I thought you dead, Malcolm, and by this marriage I have made my father happy." "Look here, Mary," said the wretched man. Opening his vest, he took out an old worn pocket-book, from which he drew the lock of golden hair tied with the faded ribbon of the maiden's snood that I gave him on the night of our parting. "I ha' never parted with it, Mary, and it shall go wi' me to my grave." I was near fainting. No words can paint the anguish of that hour. "Go, Malcolm, go. You must not be seen here. I cannot even shelter you from the storm. I can pray for you, Malcolm, but we must meet no more." My cousin advanced. Before I could prevent it, he clasped me to his bosom, pressed one last kiss upon my icy forehead, and in another minute was gone. Alas, alas! Just as he passed out, my husband entered. He knew him. It was Malcolm Graham, the one whom he had always feared as his rival in the affections of the one he loved. "How dare he enter this house?" was the first salutation. He thought that I lived here yet as Mary Gordon, husband. You have no reason to fear either him or her whom you call by the sacred name of wife. He was pale with anger. Fire shot from his dark eyes. I was terrified. I walked up to Stephen Bruce and laid my hand upon his arm. "Stephen, am I not your wedded wife? Wedded in the sight of heaven. Do you think that I, Mary Gordon, the descendant of heroic martyrs, can ever forget her plighted faith, plighted before God's holy altar? No, Mary, you will not forget your duty as a wife, but your heart is with Malcolm Graham, your early Louvre. Stephen, Malcolm is dead to me. We shall never meet again. I do not wish him to cross our path." From that hour, our domestic peace was at an end. The family malady had certainly made its appearance in the case of my unhappy husband. I was kind, affectionate, attentive to all his wants. I hushed the voice of memory and learned to be even cheerful in the performance of daily duties. I looked upward daily, hourly, Roland, and I was sustained in my hour of trial. I begged my father to see Malcolm and tell him to keep out of my husband's way. He explained all to the unhappy man and related his sad story. He had been wrecked, taken prisoner, and landed in Algiers without the possibility of communicating one line to his friends. In company with 6 others, after an absence of 7 years, he had made his escape. He promised my father to leave the country, for he saw that with the fancy which had seized my husband's brain, nothing else could restore domestic harmony. Accordingly, he went, but the evening before, I was sitting in the parlour of the manse. It was autumn, the windows were open, and I was alone. I saw the figure of a man walking slowly up the path that led to the house. He crossed the porch, and for 1 minute stood gazing in at the window. It was Malcolm Graham. He held up once more the golden lock. "Farewell, Mary. I cannot gay without your blessing." "God bless you forever and ever," was the reply which burst from my trembling lips. He walked hastily away, stood at the gate for 1 moment, waved his hand, and was gone. I hoped for peace now that he had left the country. While he was in Scotland, your father would sit for hours gloomy and silent without exchanging a word. Then he would suddenly take his hat and set out to search for Malcolm, imagining that he was always lurking about the manse. And even after he had gone, I could not regain his confidence. The memory of my poor cousin was the shadow in your father's life, the ghost that haunted him day and night. Malcolm was gone for several years, but your father never wholly recovered his spirits. In the meanwhile, Effie was born, and the duties of daughter, wife, and mother fully engrossed my daily life. When you were about 9 years old, Malcolm suddenly returned. He was now a rich man. He bought a home, furnished it, and took home a widowed sister and child to preside over his household. Life had disciplined his Christian character. He was cheerful and serene. It made me happy to hear that he was foremost in all the schemes for good around the neighbourhood, and the name of Malcolm Graham was everywhere revered. He was often called the good old bachelor, for though many mammas would have liked to place their daughters at the head of his establishment, it was evident that no such thoughts ever disturbed the dreams of good Uncle Malcolm. From the time that he returned, your father's gloom and restlessness increased. The mania had seized upon him again, and nothing would do but that the wide ocean must separate his wife from the country where Malcolm lived, although we had no kind of social intercourse. We met at church, and that was all. Much to my aged father's grief, hasty preparations were made to go to America. He was devoted to me and my dear children, and could not bear the thoughts of my leaving home and dear friends to embark upon the ocean, and go to seek a home in a strange country, with a man so gloomy and suspicious as your father had become. But during all these trials, my God sustained me, and while conscious of being in the path of duty, I was even cheerful. We left Scotland. For a while we lived comfortably, and your father's malady seemed to diminish. One drawback there was always to my happiness, and that was that your father seemed so anxious to break up all connection with Scotland that I was not allowed to write home for months, for fear that I should hear something about Malcolm. At length he returned to Scotland for the purpose of settling his affairs and making America his permanent home. On the voyage back again, the vessel was lost, and no word was ever heard from him again. About this time, poor Elsie Gibson appeared among us. I never could understand why or how it was, but she always seemed acquainted with our affairs and interested in all that concerned us. There came regular remittances. They seemed to come from New York, and were left at our door in the evening. At last I observed that Elsie Gibson appeared among us in a day or two after these packages came, and always contrived to find out about their safe arrival. At last they ceased altogether, and then came the days of poverty and trial which you, my darlings, have patiently shared. I wrote home frequently, but received no answers. Several times there have been mysterious visits at night around our dwelling. Once or twice have I seen the figure of a man peeping in at our window, and many other circumstances have led me to conjecture that your father may yet be alive, and that Elsie Gibson knows something about him. She told me that your dear grandfather died soon after your father disappeared, and although we heard once or twice from Aunt Ellen, that ceased also, and I fear that she is no more. If it is in your power, Roland, I wish you to seek your friends in Scotland. There must be some left. I have told you this sad story, my dear children, first because I want to warn you both of forming connections for life with anyone, for any other reason save that of deliberate, heartfelt choice. I acted from what I suppose to be duty. It was productive of happiness to none concerned. And another reason is that by telling you my supposition that your father may yet be alive, Roland may try all that is in his power to find out the truth and to comfort that afflicted parent. For if he is in the land of the living, he is in sorrow, of that I am sure. Nothing beside death could separate him so permanently from us, but the malady which I have always dreaded. And now, my dear children, let me once more bid you, in every hour of sore affliction through which you may be called to pass, look upward, upward for direction, upward for comfort, upward for hope. God is the Father of the fatherless. Remember the sweet promise, when my father and my mother forsake me, then the Lord will take me up. I can leave you in his gracious care. May he guide you with his counsel here, and after that receive you to glory. I have done with earthly care and sorrow. I wait for you, my loved ones. I know that you will come to me, and that with our precious Saviour throughout eternity we shall rejoice as much in the sorrows that we have suffered, as in the joys vouchsafed, if they have helped to bring us home to glory. I need not say, do not forget your mother. I know that you will not. Keep close to your Saviour. Let your motto always be, looking aloft, through joy and through sorrow, still looking aloft. After closing the manuscript, both the orphans sat weeping upon their mother's grave. How quietly she sleeps. Dear, tried, and patient mother, said Roland. How blessed is her rest in that world of peace and love. Do not weep so, Effie. God is in heaven. Do not lose sight of his promises. Have they ever failed, dear sister? He will take care of us. He will guide us, I know, if we put our trust in him. I am so weak, Roland. Since I have lost our mother, I feel as if I was all alone in the wide world, and now you are going too. But I shall come back, Effie. I may have a great many trials and disappointments, but I can trust the hand that guided Noah and Daniel and Elijah, that delivered Peter and so many of his dear servants. And Effie, don't let us doubt his love, when, to make the promises sure, he gave up his dear son and nailed him to the cross to make his word, yea and amen. I'll try, Roland, to be trustful as you, but I am a weak and timid disciple. Just think, Effie, that every drop of precious blood was just like setting the seal to all the blessed promises. And do you believe that the Saviour who could die for us would ever forget us? How you comfort me, Roland. Your words are always so kind, so strong. Don't let us forget our sainted mother's motto, Effie, looking aloft. Oh, what blessedness in such a holy trust. While seated thus, Roland perceived Elsie Gibson advancing towards them. When any change was about to take place in their earthly destiny, there was always the same old friend. They could not fathom the mystery, but so it was. And say ye are aboot to leave us, Roland, said the old woman. Ye are the child o' mony prayers, and belang to the race of the righteous. I dinna fear for ye, my bairn. I do not fear, Elsie. I am almost penniless, but the promises are all the same. I have something for ye, Roland, continued the old woman, and taking a gold watch from her pocket, she continued, It is your ain. Dinna part with it, my son. Roland examined it, and found inside the case the initials of S.B. It was a handsome article, and Roland's wonder was unbounded. S.B. What could that mean? And how was it that Elsie Gibson, so poor a woman, could afford to give him a watch? Where did this watch come from? Asked Roland, and what right have I to such a gift? Dinna fash yoursel aboot it, Roland. It is by right your ain, and some day you'll ken how. I shall like to hear o' your welfare, my dear bairn. I thank you, Elsie, for your kindness to us all. God will bless you, I am sure. May the widow's God be wi' ye, Roland, through your wanderings in the wilderness. And shaking hands warmly with both the orphans, she vanished from the cemetery. None had ever traced the old woman to her home, if home she had. Farewell now, Effie, said her brother, as he folded his sister in a warm embrace. She could not speak, but lay on his bosom overpowered with the grief of parting. Take me home, Roland, said the poor child, and they walked in silence to the gate at Woodcliff. One more embrace in silence, one long, agonized kiss, and Effie turned up the avenue with a heart too full for utterance. Mother, brother, Madeline. All gone. Nothing was left to the desolate orphan but her father in heaven.